The past restimulation effect is the idea that your experiences color your perception of future time. To give you a specific example, let's say you go to a restaurant that you really enjoyed. The employees were hospitable to your request. They came up to you, said, hey, do you need anything? They did it continuously to make sure that you were very satisfied with your meal. It was warm, it was delicious. They said bye to you as you left. All of this created a positive experience. So now in future time, when you think back, in future time when you're with your friends and they're like, hey, where do you want to go eat? You're like, hey, I know a place, because that place was somewhere where you had an experience that was favorable. So let's say you go back to that restaurant and you go with your friends and you have another positive experience. Now, partly what was inside that positive experience the second time you went, when you went with your friends, was the flood of positive emotion from the first time you went. Talking about this in a different light, take for instance my room. I love going into my room because I have a deep spiritual connection with all the different items. In the fact that I remember how I received those items, I remember the hard work maybe to buy those items, I remember how somebody gave me those items. There's an individual story behind each one of those different items, and that it may have some kind of emotional, intellectual, spiritual, artistic kind of meaning. So there's always that positive experience. So there's this past restimulation effect. However, it can also be something that is negative. So take for instance a person who got scratched by a cat. Now, they got scratched by a cat when they were younger, which left them a huge scar, let's say, on their arm. Now, in future time, they may encounter a cat and may kind of, be taken aback by the fear of possibly that cat doing something similar to the other cat. Now, in truth, there really is no relationship between this present cat and the cat of the past. However, this example just goes to show you how things of the past can affect your experience and perception of things in the present. As you can see, there's positive aspects and there's negative aspects of understanding this past restimulation effect. It also works for certain trigger words, certain words that have been long ingrained in your mind that maybe have a negative connotation to you or a positive connotation. It can be certain scents. For example, I used to be a smoker. And I remember when I first started smoking, I remember the exact location. I remember the smoke kind of going into my face. I remember the scent very intensely. So, thankfully, I've quit smoking, and I've been about 1.5 years clean. But as a side note, when I'm walking and somebody's smoking cigarettes and the scent passes my nose, I'm immediately brought back to that first time that I smoked a cigarette. That whole vision of imagery saturates my mind. So you can see how this is basically an undercurrent that affects our conscious experience, which is why we call this an awareness concept, because it is something that gives you more awareness into your everyday experiences, so that you can see each experience that you go through on a daily basis is not just the experience of that moment in present time, but it also harkens back to your previous experiences. When having a conversation with someone, say for example, someone who you've kind of had a rocky past with, or experienced a little bit of darkness, when you then get into a future argument with that person, that will then take you back towards all those other arguments that you had with them, which will then come forward, which is a lot of times why some people will pull those past arguments forth of like, hey, you did this wrong. So the thing to bear in mind here is that it is something that can color the present moment, and that if we want to move forward from the past restimulation effect, you need to create new experiences that are not tied to, say, the same locations. So, for example, If you had a bad experience at a particular restaurant, then the idea is to maybe not go back to that restaurant, so that perception of the employees or your experience with the food is not affecting you in present time. You might as well go to a different restaurant, create a new experience of positivity, and so then in future time you will have those positive experiences. So this is what we call the concept of the past restimulation effect.